the quality of measures, in my view, is very important in terms of mitigating the economic and the socioeconomic impacts of this pandemic. Therefore, countries like Singapore and any other countries in ASEAN should be able to make sure that the measures remain targeted and decisive, because we don't know how this pandemic is going to end, when is it going to end, and therefore it is very important that every country in the region is prepared in addressing this pandemic.
As you said, nobody knows when this pandemic is going to end, but at least ASEAN as a group, as a market groups, do we have already made calculation like how long will it take when we talk about economic recovery?
Well, we're talking about the recovery because we recognize that while the immediate objective of the region is to overcome the pandemic, we also need to look ahead, in terms of how we prepare the region towards a recovery. We've been talking about that. In fact, at the last summit in June, the leaders have agreed to develop this comprehensive recovery plan that will take the region in different stages of recovery, from the reopening of the economy, in terms of also of the recovery period, as well as the long-term resilience. This recovery, in my view, is very timely because it is intended mainly to discuss what has been done so far in terms of overcoming the pandemic. It's also a good opportunity to assess what are the implications in our region of the pandemic, and more importantly, to be able to identify and implement measures that would enable the region to achieve a resilient and inclusive recovery. So the Secretariat is now in the process of developing a comprehensive framework that would, of course, involve the support of all countries in the region. We're hoping that this recovery framework, as well as the implementation plan, would help us position the region in terms of how we can achieve a recovery that is not only inclusive, but is also resilient.
Speaking about the framework, being in more detail, could you elaborate more with us? Could you share us so we have the idea what kind of recovery plans already prepared by us, ASEAN?
Okay, the recovery plan or framework is following a very simple approach, a very flexible approach, in a sense that what we're trying to do here is to identify broad strategies that would enable the region to recover in the coming months. So the broad strategies would include strategies as far as strengthening the health systems, for example. We're also looking at how we can further improve social cohesion in the region, considering that this pandemic, as we all know, has adversely affected livelihoods and lives of peoples in ASEAN. We're also looking at how the region should be able to restore supply chain connectivity, considering, again, the adverse impact of this pandemic on global and regional value chains. At the same time, we're trying to be more proactive. We're trying to be looking ahead in terms of also identifying what are the accelerating trends in the region that ASEAN should be able to focus on. And one important accelerating trend here is the importance of digitalization or digital transformation, because we've seen how during this time, the use of different technologies has a very useful effects in terms of dealing with this pandemic. And lastly, one important broad strategy here of our recovery framework is to see how we can come up with a more resilient and inclusive recovery for the region. So in that basis, we're looking at, for example, the ability, for example, to develop a more comprehensive pandemic response for the region moving forward. We're also looking at how the region is able to address a number of sustainable issues, including, for example, climate change, human development, and so forth. So this is a comprehensive framework that is not only intended to deal with the immediate impacts of the pandemic, but also we're trying to use this framework as a guide for the region and how to move ahead and achieve a more inclusive recovery for the region as a whole.